Not too long ago, I put up a post on Craigslist asking to either sell or trade my fish tank for a smaller one. I put in my phone number as the contact source and asked to text only. After a couple of hours, I got a text from someone who was willing to trade. We agreed to meet at a Walmart in a couple of days when we were both free and do our trade. During those days, the guy kept on texting me involving small talk. He asked me about my name and where I worked, and me being a foolish person, I answered his questions. I use Craigslist often, and I have never really had a bad experience with anyone, so I really thought this guy was just weird. I thought that he was just trying to be friendly. I told this guy what car I drove and what college I went to, again, never really stopping to think what kind of info I was giving a total stranger. When the day came to meet this guy, he told me he could only meet me after 10 p.m. I thought that was odd, but agreed to meet him anyway since my poor fish were already stuck in a 5-gallon jug. So me and my boyfriend drove to the Walmart at about 10:15 and got there in 20 minutes. The guy texted me and said he was already there in an old yellow Camaro. I replied saying, "We're here in a gray Ford." He then texted me and said, "Who is we?" At that moment, I realized something was really off with this guy, and I replied saying, "My husband and me." That was a lie, but I felt he should know I wasn't alone. He never responded after that text. My boyfriend and I went around the parking lot a couple of times looking for the yellow Camaro, but we never found it. I tried calling the guy, and he ignored my calls. We decided it best to just leave. I don't know what would have happened if I'd met this creep by myself, or even with my boyfriend there, but I have a feeling it would not have been something good. I removed the post from Craigslist that night and saved the creep's phone number just in case he tried contacting me again. A couple of weeks later, I got a text from several different phone numbers asking about the tank. I never responded to anyone because I believe it was the same guy, since I for sure deleted the post immediately. I hope he can't somehow track my phone, and of course, I'm not using Craigslist anymore.
Number 2.
A few weeks ago, I had to fly out to a small town I'd never been to in order to look for a place to live. I'm moving there in the fall to start grad school. My boyfriend flew with me, and before the trip, I researched all sorts of apartments on Craigslist and set up a bunch of appointments. Our first appointment was in the afternoon in this sort of remote residential area. The landlord sounded fine over email and asked me to call him an hour before the appointment to confirm that I was coming. I called, but he didn't answer, so my boyfriend and I started walking to the house and just hoped that he would show up. Maybe 10 minutes before the appointment, he called me.
"Are you coming?"
Yes. He sounded like an older man and had this very strange, slow way of talking. But I just thought, maybe he was older. "Yes, we're in front of the house now." He got extremely upset.
"We?"
Yeah, my boyfriend's with me."
"You never told me you had a boyfriend. You never said that."
It had never crossed my mind to have to tell him this information, since my boyfriend would not be coming to live with me. He was just helping me look for apartments on the trip. I told the man so, and after a very long pause, he said,
"I'm sorry, it's just sometimes people don't tell me when they're married, and it surprises me. I'll see you soon."
Then he hung up. I told my boyfriend about what the man had said, and he was immediately weirded out. He wanted to leave, but there were slim pickings in terms of real estate at this point, so I stupidly said that we had to stay, in case this place was the place. As we're discussing it, we see a man leave the house we're going to view. This man was very young and extremely sketchy looking, greasy hair, furtive eyes. He took one look at us and ran out of the house to his car and pulled away from the curb with a screech. Okay, So now we're both really weirded out. But this isn't enough for us to bail just yet, and we look at each other wondering what to do. The landlord arrives. He's in his 50s, very tall and very strong looking. His eyes are completely blank and empty of warmth or emotion. He slowly walks up to us and says, "I'd shake your hands, but mine are dirty." "What from?" my boyfriend asks. "Work," is the flat reply. He asks us a lot of questions about me, completely ignoring my boyfriend. The entire time, he stares into my eyes without blinking. What am I going to school for? What other places am I considering for living? Is my boyfriend moving into this town too? I try to give answers that are as vague as possible. Meanwhile, my boyfriend asks the landlord questions of the same kind, which he refuses to answer. Then he says, apropos of nothing, "Let me show you the basement." At this point, I should have noped out of there, but I didn't. I kept thinking this was an eccentric old man from a small town, and that we were just feeling paranoid. My boyfriend, on the other hand, wanted out of there, but he followed us as the man led us to the back of the house, away from the street, to this sort of detached shed. He opened the door, and we saw that there were stairs leading down into utter darkness. He flipped the switch at the top of the stairs, and the light didn't come on. Normally, the response for this is, "Oh shit, the light's out," or something like that. But he just said, and slowly walked down into the darkness. And then he stood there, without moving, in the dark and said,
"Aren't you coming down?"
"There's nothing to see if the light's out," says my boyfriend. The landlord just stands there for a long time, then slowly walks up the stairs and closes the basement door without saying anything. He took us into the house. Weird and increasingly creepy things ensued. The front door, the only exit to the house, locked automatically. And when my boyfriend tried to fiddle with it, the man got really upset and told him to leave it alone. He managed to get it open, secretly though. The man kept trying to box us into small rooms and, according to my boyfriend, kept reaching his hands into his pockets only to take them away when he caught us looking. On Craigslist and in person, the man claimed that there was a grad student already living in the house, but the evidence of that seemed deranged. There were neat piles of generic textbooks on the table, but not other things 20-something-year-olds might be reading. There was a bowl of fruit on the table, but no other food in the fridge, or pantry, or utensils for that matter. There were maybe 3 t-shirts in the closet. This supposed grad student wasn't out of town, but the landlord couldn't say what school he went to or how long he'd been renting the house. Finally, the man had showed us every single room in the house but one. This one he refused to open, claiming it was just the attic, and we didn't need to see anything up there. He gave us several reasons when we inquired. It was unfinished, there was furniture up there, it would smell bad. The last one I believed, because standing near the door, it smelt terrible. Finally, we made our excuses and bolted out of the door. The man walked us out, pretended to go to his car to leave, and when he thought we had turned the corner, he slowly sauntered back into the house. My boyfriend, fixated on the idea that there was something wrong with this guy, Googled the man that night. We found out 3 things. That he was a pillar of the community, known by a lot of the townspeople. That there was no evidence of him owning or managing a real estate company, as he claimed on Craigslist, and that he had listed his home address as the very house we had been touring. The house where the grad student lived. So that was the creepiest thing that has ever happened to me.
Number 3.
I live in a small village in the very north of Scotland, so large shops and resources are a far distance. For that reason, I usually rely on internet shopping to get my needs. I needed to buy a backpack for when I leave for university, one better than the one I already had, so I turned to Craigslist as I normally do. As a student, I prefer to go for the cheap option. Craigslist usually provides that. After looking for a short while, I came across a really good looking bag at only £15. I thought this was an absolute steal, so I phoned the seller. Immediately what struck me was this guy's accent. It was obvious that he wasn't Scottish or even from the UK. He sounded Polish or something. He said that he was from Glasgow. That's at least 5 hours by car from where I live. But when I told him the area I was from, he reluctantly offered to come to my house to give it to me. And this all seemed strange, being that the sale was only for £15. Nonetheless, I foolishly gave him my fucking address. He said he'd drop by later on that day. Skipping forward about 7 hours to like 10 p.m., I was thinking that he wasn't going to come. But around 10:20, there was a chap at the door. Surprised that it was so late, I looked out the window and around to the front door just to be sure, and sure enough, it was a young guy standing with a backpack in his hand. Slightly relieved that it wasn't a robber, I went to the door and opened it up. It was the guy on the phone for sure. The accent confirmed it. He said, "Hey, here it is." I smiled and took out my wallet, taking out £30 because of the trouble he went to bring it here, and the condition of the bag. He smiled and opened his arms as if he wanted a hug. Being a gay guy, I rarely turned down a hug and just assumed it was a cultural thing, so I hugged him and he left. I was still confused that he came all this way just for £15, but I didn't find it overly strange. Boy, was I wrong. At around midnight, I was finishing another episode of 24 and was ready to go to bed. From outside the house, I heard a car door shut, which was really weird for this time of night, and in my area, the nearest house is like a quarter-mile away, and I rarely see the people that live there. I paused the TV and went over to the window to see who it was. I recognized the car as being the green sedan that the guy had, but he wasn't there. No one was. It was at that point when I heard the back gate opening. I fucking nearly shit myself. I ran quietly to the kitchen where the back door is, staying low down the way there to avoid whoever it was seeing me from the kitchen window. I usually don't lock both doors till I go to bed, so both doors were still unlocked. I grabbed the keys from the counter and quickly locked the door. As I did, I got a fright at the security light turning on in the back garden. It's a motion sensor that turns on. I looked up to see that it was him again. He had a creepy smile on his face, no teeth showing, just a smile. I stood up and shouted, "Dude, what the fuck are you doing back here?" He said nothing, and just smiled, looking directly at me. I found myself just staring at him until the situation actually kicked in, and I took the keys from the back door, then bolted to the front door to lock it. About halfway to the front door, I heard a window smash in the kitchen. My stomach ached at the fact that he's probably making his way into the house. I made a turn to go up the stairs towards the toilet so I could lock myself in. When in the toilet, I heard him stumbling and broken glass falling to the floor. He was in my house. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and quickly dialed 999. I told them of the situation as fast as I could, and they said they'll get officers out to me as fast as possible. The police station was just up from my village, so I knew someone would get here generally quickly. The operator asked me to stay on the phone until someone arrived. I was focused on the guy's footsteps, which would slow down and speed up every so often. He eventually walked up the stairs and tried to open the bathroom door. When he realized it was locked, he said,
I know you're in there, Cameron."
Hearing him say my name made my stomach churn. I screamed, "The police are coming! Just back the fuck off, man!" After saying that, he started to kick the door. I backed up against it with more strength than I knew I had. Then, in the distance, I heard the sirens and the blue lights reflecting from the bathroom windows. He continued to kick the door, but then I heard the car doors open outside and fast footsteps. I heard the front door open, and then, "Police officer with a taser, drop the knife!" Again, I felt sick knowing he had a knife. It sounded as if he started running back downstairs. Then I heard, "Taser! Taser!" and the guy screaming. Then a thump. After he came through, they officially arrested him for attempted murder and trespassing. I've pressed charges, but the fact is, he won't get any more than 7 months in jail. After that, he'll be free to come right back. I'm now trying to sell my house to get out of here as fast as possible.
Number 4.
Last June, my guy and I were living with our roommates and our 2 kids. Our roommates decided to leave and only gave us 3 weeks' notice on a month-to-month lease. We were already planning on leaving ourselves in a couple months, but with the short notice, we decided that we just had to find a place somewhere, anywhere. Luckily, we both worked remotely, so we had the ability to move anywhere in the state. For 2 weeks, we searched every rental site on the internet that we could find. This eventually led us to Craigslist. Yeah, Craigslist. We had multiple rejections from landlords who weren't willing to work on deposit, which is understandable. However, one was open to the idea. She was a nice older woman in the state with an approved realtor profile. I googled her. The house was perfect. It was a side-by-side duplex, which would be fine for a little while, cute little kitchen, and a backyard. The crime rate didn't look too bad, and a school close by. She accepted large dogs, which was perfect, and the deposit wasn't too high. After some researching online and talking, we made arrangements to move into the home. When we left our old home, we took off to finally see our new humble abode. We dropped off the kids at my mom's for safety's sake and went on our way. The drive was awful. We were lost left and right and even nearly ended up in the wrong town. Eventually, we were able to find an ATM to pay for the rent and deposit. After getting lost and yelling at one another on the freeway for another 45 minutes in the middle of absolute nowhere with limited reception and having to find a place to call her, we lost reception again. But we eventually found the gate where she met us to let us in. Something was off immediately. She seemed fidgety and nervous. She didn't look like her pictures. She kept wiping her nose with her sleeve, saying she was sick. She was a little older, and maybe like she had been on drugs at some point, or maybe still. We went through the gate and drove about a half-mile down to her home. Apparently, her office was also her home. I didn't know that. The property was filled with old trucks, boats, and buses. It was like a graveyard for oversized vehicles. My boyfriend, completely frustrated, looked at me, and in his failed attempt at humor, blurted out, "Well, we're either going to get a house, or we're going to die. Let's find out." We parked and met with the woman outside. She seemed really anxious and was telling us random things about her many projects. I assumed tweaker. Sorry, but that's just what I assumed, and it's a common problem in the area. We went inside the house, which strangely was well decorated and very modern. The rest of the house was a little trashy. She claimed her office was flooded and we just have to sign the paperwork there. We agreed. My boyfriend and I signed the paperwork, but when we realized we were missing $200, he felt secure enough to leave me to check the car to see if it was missing. She went on to tell me about the house and the arrangements, random things. The key is by the light outside. They said there's a washer and dryer in the garage below. We don't know anything about that, but you might want to go in there. It might be kind of icky. They also said there's a crawl space where somebody can get in. I'm not sure what they're talking about, but just to be careful and make sure it's okay. She was incredibly adamant about not having been at the home for quite some time. Okay, I realize that's the part where I should have definitely paid attention, But it was such a chaotic day, and I was so exhausted that I just said, "Okay, sure." I shrugged it off. I just wanted to get the hell home. My boyfriend came back in, and she said the missing amount was fine, so we could just tack on the missing amount to the next month's rent. Perfect. We thanked her, and were on our way. New lease in hand. We picked up the kids and drove another hour to the home. The entire drive, we were watching the miles down to the town and counting down. 15, 10, 5. Then we arrived. It was an old 3-story building duplex. Not a 2-story, but a 3-story. The town was eerily depressing. Have you ever seen Gumo? It's a spitting image of Gumo. Actually, I lived in this same town as a kid with my dad sometimes. It was literally 1983. There were mullets and 1980s tank tops, children playing outside, while their meth-addicted parents smoked on the porches and chugged cheap redneck beers like water. It was hot, but the sky was dark and gray. Even the power lines were hanging down and about to fall. There were drug addicts walking around and small children playing outside. Other children played by themselves, running their bikes through the streets unsupervised. This was not Mayberry. That beautiful yard had grown into a jungle. This duplex was practically abandoned, and nobody was living in the other side. My boyfriend and I looked at one another with a sense of dread. "Is this it?" I asked. This is it. This is where we live now," he told me. He grabbed the key by the light, and we walked into the house. It was worse. The floor was covered in water. The fridge had been leaking for a while, and the power wasn't on yet. We had called the company earlier that day, and they said we would have to wait a week to turn it on. There was a cup of coffee left on the kitchen counter. I noticed the locks had been recently changed, and the door had obviously been broken into several times, so much that the locks were completely useless. There was like this weird gap between the door and the frames. There was a horrible, horrible smell, like the stench of rotting flesh or something. My boyfriend went to grab the things while I watched our kids. I walked in the living room. The house had been painted that day. It was roasting inside, and the smell between the paint, the smell of mold, an overwhelming smell of death. I had to open a window. I tried. He tried. The windows were broken and painted shut. The pictures online had to have been from a few years ago. The place was a train wreck. Whoever painted the house painted quickly and got the hell out of there. It was poorly done. Even the door handles were painted. They painted the walls, ceiling, banisters, and even the stairs this ugly, depressing salmon pink color. That instantly set me off. "I think there was blood in here," I told my boyfriend. "Why do you say that?" he asked, dropping down more boxes into the office. "That's the only reason to paint it this god-awful color. Blood would seep through white paint eventually, and it's impossible to get rid of." The only reason I knew this is because I remember hearing about a news story where a woman took over a murder house. As I walked further into the living room, I realized there was a huge bleach stain about 2 feet wide on the dark carpet. The house was lifted so high with the garage or basement, whatever it was below. I didn't understand how it could feel like it had been flooded or why the carpet was so badly wrinkled. We scoped out the house and went upstairs to the bedrooms. The windows were so low to the ground and hanging open, and I just thought, this is not safe for kids. There was a bucket of paint with the paint roller still inside, randomly left behind in what would have been our bedroom. I stood by the window, which was only about maybe 2 feet high. It must have been about 4 feet tall, 3 feet wide, no guards, and was completely open. There wasn't even a screen. I could have sworn I saw a flash of light while I stared down 3 stories below from the death trap. Call it whatever you want, but I instantly had a vision of a woman with long hair falling out the window and crashing down on the ground below. I didn't tell my boyfriend. I had to get out from upstairs and just took the kids. About 10 minutes later, the smell of death was making it impossible for me to breathe. I had to go to the bathroom. We had been driving for hours that day, but the moment I stepped in, I noticed the mirrored bathroom cabinets were cracked, left open, and a toilet paper holder shoved inside in parts. I walked in a little more and noticed the red spots on the shower walls and a sealed tampon in the middle of the floor. I don't think the maintenance man had any use for a tampon, and it looked as if though someone had gotten the hell out of there and did so quickly. I was about to go in, but something held me back, and a little voice in my head said, "Don't go into the bathroom." So I didn't. My boyfriend was sitting in the car. He said it was too hot and needed some air. I looked down below out the living room window and noticed that there were groups of people walking by and making comments about someone being in the house. Those people being us. I was trying to come up with every positive reason to stay here. I kept coming up with excuses like, it's not so bad. Maybe it just needs a woman's touch. Maybe flowers will make it better. Maybe some air freshener. Maybe like 10 bottles of air freshener. And a lot of bleach. I kept trying to convince myself by looking around and thinking how to make it work. I opened up the closet and then peeked inside to see that it had led further down behind the wall. Keep in mind, this house was probably built in the very early 1900s and is around 100 years old, if not more. It wasn't uncommon back then for secret rooms and passageways to exist. It's so hard to explain the feeling I had, but as I was about to peek around inside to see the back of the closet, something came over me. I knew that if I had gone any further, my kids and I wouldn't be alive. Everything felt so heavy, and I was about to throw up. This was the closest I had ever felt in my entire life to not just death, but hell. Pure evil. I can't even possibly explain the amount of dread and discomfort. I was so uncomfortable. My son, who was always positive, came closer, excited and shouting, "Is that another room?" I full on went pissed off Mother Bear, pushed him away, and closed the door. Suddenly, the words that the landlord had told me ran through my head again. They said there's a crawl space where someone could get in. Just then, I heard something else in the house. Something like someone moving around, somewhere around behind the closet area. I stood there for a moment and had the eerie thought creep into my head, "You're all going to die here if you stay." That very thought sent me into a panic, and with my heart pounding, I quickly grabbed my kids and ran out to the car. I could tell that my boyfriend was visibly upset with the home, giving me an opportunity to skip beating around the bush. "Hey, let's just go," I told him. I was a little bit hysterical, and I don't remember exactly what I said, but it was on the lines of, "It will be fine, we'll find something. We don't belong here. We need to get the fuck out. Let's just go. I don't care, I'm not mad, let's just fucking go." He was relieved. Neither of us wanted to disappoint the other, but after talking things through, it turned out we had the same feeling of dread and death in us. He was just afraid of dying, as I was. I was absolutely positive that one night, that place would have killed us. I asked him to take pictures so that the landlord would know the situation. As we were leaving, we noticed that there was actually another window on our side of the duplex, which we believed was the secret room. I heard the neighbors across the street laughing and saying something like, "Looks like they're leaving." That didn't last long. We slept in the car for an hour or so at a nearby gas station. We were so exhausted. I cried, of course, and then called my mom to see if we could stay the night. My boyfriend did his best to comfort me, and we explained to the landlord we didn't move in, that we had taken pictures and there were multiple health code violations. We would send them if she needed them. She didn't even hesitate or want to see the photos, and within minutes offered to write a check for our money back. Bless her heart. I swear there was someone else in that house. It still terrifies me to talk about it, and I'll never rent a sight unseen again. By the way, that's not the end. That feeling haunted me for weeks, so much I couldn't sleep. Even my dreams were haunting me, with the image of that woman falling out of the window. I eventually Googled the address to find out who had lived there before us. I found a woman's name. I Googled that woman's name, and she's dead. She was beaten to death with a baseball bat, apparently stabbed, allegedly, by her daughter and her daughter's boyfriend. They stuffed the body in a car for weeks after hiding it in a garage, and it was found a couple of hours away. I don't believe that the news story says that the murder took place in that house. I still don't even know, but it feels like it was involved somehow. Or something else happened. I'm not sure. I just know one thing. Someone is hiding something, and I definitely believe that someone else was in that house.